Well, that was a really hard act to follow, and actually I've been so impressed with the papers at this conference. We knew they were good when we selected them, but it's a little bit intimidating. I don't know if I can live up to the standard here. I'll do my best, but I actually, I knew I was going to be the last. I think I'm the oldest guy here actually, so I think let the old guy be last. But it seems like a young person's sport, and how do you keep up with all this? But I would have to say that we're really thankful for all these people that come many distance. But let me just say again to thank Fedor, Erica, Bob Miller, Battle, the staff here, and Robbie Turkey, ANU, and who? And John Stakursky as well, for all they've done here. It's been a real success as far as I can see. So thank you very much. So yeah, when I came, I've been here now for 2 weeks, and Fedor got a summer home in a place called Kealoha, and they wanted to work on our projects, but I was so I had the fear of God about being the last, and when I arrived here, the paper wasn't done, the slides weren't done. So what I did is just hibernate, and that made Harry and Sungjin really happy, but Bertel and Fedor not so much. So so I apologize for not being a bad co-author at the summer home, but let's see what happens. So if I don't want to totally blow this, but here's what we do. This is an empirical paper. We've been working on this quite a long time. I don't even want to tell you how long we've been working on this. We finally got this written, so that's a great thing. But we're looking at car rental. There's basically a rental car company in Seoul, Korea, that sells large numbers of its rental cars in wholesale auctions. And we got data of thousands of car auctions that were recorded online in 2-minute continuous time ascending bid auctions. Now, this auction was invented, it's kind of like empirical auction design, it was invented by the manager who Sungjin is friends with to defeat suspected collusion. So before they went online, they used to sell the cars in lots near, where the rental car company is, and people would gather around and would be all open outcry. Now, it's called, forgive me the terminology, Harry's they would say it's an English auction. It's an ascending bid, but you cry out what the price is. And they thought that these guys were colluding, so what they did is they moved it online. They made all of the bidders anonymous, and they went one step further, which is you only know your own bid during this auction. I'm going to show you in just a minute, but you don't see any other person's bid. You only there's a binary, like a light on the screen, which goes on if you're the high bidder, and if someone outbids you, it goes off, but you don't know by how much they outbid you, okay? So I'm going to show you how this works in a minute. So this is like an informational restriction on the auction, and we want to try to show you the effect. Now, actually, in this room, we call it the Korean auction. There's the English auction. We're going to talk about the Japanese auction, but actually, Bob and Aaron and Jeff Grogger have a really cool paper in the Journal of Econometrics last year, special issue that Mike edited, right, in honor of, is that issue? Or anyway, it's in the Journal of Econometrics. But it's on Texas certificates of deposits. It's got the same informational restriction. And so they call their paper Bidding Frictions in Ascending Bid Auctions, something like that. Very, very cool. So I really recommend. We get very similar conclusions. We have slightly different methodologies. But just to quote the last line is, this market features frequent jump bidding and winning bids well above the highest losing bid, suggesting standard empirical approaches for ascending bid auctions may not be suitable. And I totally agree with that. In other words, we are looking at kind of trying to fill a gap in the literature and structural auctions. And Harry will be talking about that more tomorrow in the summer school. Most of it's been static. Harry had pioneered some work on dynamic, but there's really not a lot of work on dynamic ascending bid auctions. So that's really interesting to me. And it's also just following on the paper by Andy on learning. There's auctions are interesting because people are learning by bidding. We're going to show you this learning by bidding. And so we're trying to learn about the best way to learn about how people learn. That's how I like to say it. So here's an auction, okay? This is an auction and it lasts 120 seconds. And what you're seeing on this screen, the red line is the high bids track. Okay, now you would never see this if all the bids were public and shared. You would never see like the blue star there. Why would you bid below the high bid? Well, it's because they don't know it. You know, so it's a behavior called bid creeping. They're arriving around 50 seconds. They make a bid, but the little red light doesn't go on, so they wait another second, increase it, and keep increasing it until you see the star gets to be the highest bid there. So that's right here, right? And then at that point, he stops because he's the high bid and he figures, okay, I don't need to go any further. But then the triangle outbids him. And then you see he continues on bidding, right? But in this auction, actually, the triangle wins. That's bidder 41. And it makes that last bid right there, just a little bit higher than the square. But bidder 41 only makes 2 bids in this auction, right? And he wins, okay? So let's show you another one. So, you know, we get this bid creeping. Now here is bidder 36, and bidder 36 is a bid sniper. Okay, bidder 36 is the triangle. This bidder 36. There's a lot of bids by bidder 36. But let me go back for a minute. This is bid sniping. So there's the dot. The bidder 3 wins this auction at 118 seconds. He makes a single bid, wins it, and all these other bids are trying to compete. And so we see bid sniping in this. So single bid, win it right at the last part of the auction. Now, let me show you some dumb bidding, okay? Now take a look at this. Some bidder here, this bidder 28, comes in at the first second of the auction. It bids 14,690. And that's that top line. And look at all these people. They're furiously trying to discover what the high bid, trying to make that red light go on. And it's not going to happen because this guy has way outbid them. Now, why is that dumb? Well, why would this guy have to bid such high? So if he started a little bit lower, even if he started 6,000, he had plenty of room to win it and move it up here. And he could have won the auction paying way, way less than he did. So this is an example of what we're going to call early overbidding. They enter the auction. It's an extreme example, but we're going to show that there's lots of examples of this in the auction. So I'm going to show you that later. So now here is something crazy bidding. Now the rules of the auction, here's a guy who's zigzagging up and down. You know, now you might say, is he signaling to other bidders? You know, is this kind of collusion? But the problem is that when you lower your bid, you're obligated to whatever high bid, and no other bidder will see what you're doing. So it's totally uninformative. It has no communication value whatsoever because they can't see his bid, and maybe he's bored or something. Who knows what's happening here? So there's some weird stuff going on if you want to try to explain this bidding data. Now, let's just think about the auction literature. And, you know, we have static versus dynamic. So this is clearly a dynamic auction mechanism. It's known, the auction literature is really analyzed one that is often called English, but it's actually called Japanese. If you look at the experts, Macmillan and so on. There's a clock or a thermometer auction. There's a clock that starts low and everyone puts their hand up, you know, if they're willing to buy at that price, and the price is going up and up. And then when the price goes over your value, you put your hand down, right? And then, so what you can see about that at the clock or thermometer auction is the high bidder will win it at just 1 unit over the second highest bid. So it's strategically equivalent to the Vickery auction, the second price auction, right? So those are first price sealed bids and second price. There's no opportunity for learning in those auctions. There's static mechanisms. So the question is which one is better? Now, what you can show pretty easily is the Japanese auction is, at least for rational bidders, is strategically equivalent to a static second price bid auction. And then under symmetry in the auctions, independent private values, revenue equivalence, right? First and second price auctions, they're not giving the exact same outcome, but the expected same revenue, the same expected revenue. But to my knowledge, and I think Bob probably and Aaron would agree, the open outcry, that's still an unsolved problem. And that's what we're trying to crack. That's what they're trying to crack, we're trying to crack, and we try to make some progress on that today. So that's where we think we're making some contribution. So this also points out the difference between theoretical auction design. I mean, this is just, Roger Myerson, why did he get his Nobel Prize for this paper called Optimal Auction Design in 1982, published in Mathematics Operations Research? And he showed that among all static and dynamic mechanisms, this, the direct revelation, the Vickery auction, you just report truthfully your valuation, and then with an optimal reservation, that's the optimal auction design. At least under the independent private values paradigm. But if you look at how this auction works, it's actually too subtle for a lot of people. So there's well-known, Kagel is one of the leaders. He's run off lots and lots of auctions, been replicated. People get, they get that they're not paying their bid, but that leads them to overbid. They say, wow, I don't have to pay what I bid, so I can actually increase my probability of winning by bidding more than my value. And if they play it repeatedly, they're going to get burned, right? Sometimes they're going to bid so high that they're going to end up having to pay more than they actually think the thing is worth. But despite that, despite the learning, people just don't get it, okay? Now, if you then look at the Japanese auction, that's just more salient to laboratory subjects. You're just seeing the clock rise, and then clearly you're not going to stay in when it goes above your value. So there you get the expected outcome, but in the other auctions, they're just not rational enough. So the revenue equivalence doesn't hold, and the optimal auction design actually may be a second price for you're exploiting some kind of irrationality. It gives more than Myerson predicted in some sense, right? So now there's another thing we got to take account for is collusion. And there's suspected collusion, and you want to try to make your auction collusion proof. Except I don't think there's any theorems on a collusion. You can kind of thwart collusion. You can't collusion proof an auction. In fact, it's hard to detect collusion. There are people trying to do it. There was this guy, Kei Kawai, at Nick's conference last weekend. And he's he's got some new papers and one in the JPE. Kind of cool stuff, cool ideas for detecting collusion in Japanese auctions, or auctions in Japan. And but the best is, people like Peter Crampton worked on the FCC auctions where there was collusion suspected, like they would be bidding in the billions in these spectrum auctions. And then there would be like $5 billion and 69.33 cents or something like that. And they say, what's that about? Well, they were signaling in the high order digits of the bids. So one is bid coarsening, is one, and then bid anonymization. You wouldn't know who are the bidders. You just know there's some other bidder. But they were otherwise open outcry or open bid auctions that the bids of others were seen. So these were there's work by Pat Bayari suggesting that actually did help thwart collusion. So that's why there's informational restrictions. It's kind of cool that a guy who's not an economist, this executive, just intuitively thought these things will be reasonable in his auctions. I'm sure he wasn't aware of Peter Crampton and Leslie Marx's work and so on. Okay, now here what we see is there's kind of three regimes. So before 2003, open outcry auctions where they find out collusion's going on. I don't know how they found out, but they just suspected it. So then starting in 2003, they switch. He hires a software engineer. They make this continuous time auction, and they start using this. And between 2003 to 2007, they switch to this new regime. They call that regime 1. This what we call the Korean auction. And then, for some reason, he gives it up again. He goes back to, but now to an auction house in Seoul, Korea, a professional auction house that charges a commission, and it's an open outcry auction again. Okay. Now he said that they gave it up. He said he was very convinced that his auction design thwarted the collusion. It got rid of it, but it was just too expensive to maintain the programmers. So that's why we switched back to the auction house. So I'm going to show you a graph now. This is a prediction between regime 0. We have the last 3 months of 2002, and then we have the first 6 months of 2003, and we break them into regime, first 3 months and then this next 3 months. And, there's mixed evidence. Actually, if you just want to do diffs and diffs or something, just compare the mean price. Only the ones shaded in gray, you see a significant increase in price. So if it thwarts collusion, you should see higher prices under regime 1. But for a lot of the other cars, we don't have a lot of observation. We can't really tell just using reduced form methods. Okay, and forget about the p-value, but there's the p-values or tests of equality, 2-sample t-test kind of thing. So just one more initial hook into this is we have a paper going back in 2014 in GINDIC, thanks to John Asker. He accepted this paper. And there's something called the linkage principle. And if there's common values in an auction, you really want to have more information. More information is better, because in seeing the bidding ascending, you might realize, wow, that person's willing to pay more. Maybe I should be willing to pay more too. And that can lead to higher revenues. And so we see the switch from regime 1 back to the auction house. And so the Korean auction has less information than the auction house, which is full identities. And what we find is the prices actually went up. They went up from the Korean auction, consistent with the linkage principle. You might say, but what about collusion? And but our results are kind of ambiguous, because at this auction house, there might be collusion going on too, but there were more bidders too. The auction house brought in more, so the prices could have been higher just because there were more bidders. So this is, again, shows you the limitations of not using any structure. There's only so much you can say. We're glad he published our paper, but our paper was inconclusive. We just showed this stuff, and they published in GINDIC. So given the time, I'm going to hold, I know you're tired, and so we're not going to go too far. And I'll be presenting this again tomorrow for the students, so we'll have more time to go through this. But let me give you the conclusions of what we do, and then if we have time, I'll go into how we got those conclusions. But so we've already shown there's this, what we call frequent early bidding. Now, the natural way is perfect Bayesian equilibrium. We all want to say, wow, we're macho, we can solve a perfect. Well, actually, I agree with Bob, and nobody knows how. I mean, tell me anybody who can solve in this kind of game a perfect Bayesian equilibrium. We're going to show you, think about it. You have a prior, you don't even know how many bidders are in the auction. You have to have a prior, and just anything like delay, you have to have a prior over all their valuations, and you have to do very exquisitely hard, high-dimensional Bayesian updating to calculate a perfect Bayesian equilibrium. Now, but what we can say is if the auction has a hard close, in other words, if you're guaranteed when you push the button in the last second of the auction, your bid will be taken, there will always be an uninformative equilibrium, which is the first price sealed bid. In other words, everyone snipes, waits to the last second, and doesn't learn at all, and submits it under a prior about how many bidders there'll be in the auction. That is always an equilibrium. Okay, so then the question is there any informative perfect Bayesian equilibrium? And I'll show you an example of a 2x2 case. We don't know the general answer, but I'll show you a 2x2 case where we can show there is no informative. In other words, there's no early bidding. So the perfect Bayesian equilibrium is so hyper-rational, which is any bidding that you do early is only working to your advantage. So the best thing you should do is just wait to the end of the auction and submit your bid. So we're going to try to convince you of that the case. So then if this is true, if this can be shown more generally, we have a real paradox, right? The game theory predicts stuff that we just don't see. And so now we have to go behavioral in some sense, right? Somehow we have to be behavioral. And we're going to introduce bidding frictions like Bob did. And we're going to introduce, and Aaron, rational inattention a la Chris Sims. And they had something like, they didn't call it that. But basically, we're going to have some inattentive visitor. Like sometimes they're just tuned out, and every once in a while they look back at the screen, like they're looking at their cell phone. So we're going to be able to, and then finally, we're going to get away from Bayesian equilibrium. We're going to go to something like rational expectations equilibrium. They're going to have fixed beliefs about the high bid in the auction. That red line, it's going to have a stochastic process. So it's going to be like a rational expectations equilibrium, but it's called an anonymous equilibrium. There's a concept called anonymous equilibrium where you don't know who your players are, but you look for a sufficient statistic and then have rational beliefs about that. So you're going to have rational beliefs about the high bid in the auction. Okay. So, and what we're going to show is this model can predict qualitatively the early bidding behavior we've got. But and what it's going to predict is this early bidding works against the auctioneer, the seller, that by being less than fully rational in the perfect Bayesian sense, the bidders, the bidders in the auction will learn to buy the auction at a lower price than they would in a first price sealed bid auction. So in this auction, you'd rather have a first price, you'd rather preclude any learning because it's the shopping around and learning helps them end up winning for less money. But what we're going to show is that this model doesn't fit the data as well. There's, we get qualitatively, but we still get this early overbidding relative to our model, which is a very still rational model. And so it's like the overbidding you saw in the lab by Kagel. People are like, there's too much animal spirits, there's some kind of bounded rationality. And when you take that into account, they're actually getting more from this Korean auction than they would in a first price sealed bid auction. Okay. So in other words, it makes this executive look like really smart, like he's aware of the foibles of his bidders. He designs an art to somehow exploit them and do better than doing it would have been easier to program a first price sealed bid auction or a second price sealed bid auction, but they didn't. And it's kind of like, he's exploiting animal spirits. And when you look at it that way, you'd say, well, if these guys are so smart and they're colluding, well, we're actually finding they're overpaying. They're overpaying, and we're going to give you rational robots that will bid less and win less, pay less money. And if you say, well, if they're all colluding, why didn't they just program some robots that are rational and be their bidding agents? And we're going to show these bidding agents will outperform the humans in this auction. Okay, so that's the bottom line. Okay, so now I'm going to try to show you that. Yeah.
A lot of stuff in theory, and maybe not exactly what you're citing, risk neutrality. So
yeah, we have risk neutrality. Yeah.
So failure of risk neutrality, that's another.
We're going to come up. We have one conjecture. One is that the bidders in these auctions are car dealers, right? They're buying the car at wholesale and they're going to resell it. And it might be they're an employee of a car dealership and they got a quota of these cars. So one of the things, and these auctions are sold one after another, and it might be late in the day. I didn't get enough, cars, and now I have to just win just to come back with something, right? And we're going to investigate whether that might go some way of doing it. Now, here's another hypothesis you might want to say. It's called straightforward bidding. So that's in this Japanese auction, the thermometer auction. So you might conjecture, like when you go back to those pictures, you saw people dropping out. They only went so high. They didn't just follow all the way up. At some point, did they get to their valuation? So is it like dynamically they're bidding and learning enough in the auction. So we can just model it as if it was a straightforward bidding, which is stay in until you reach your value and then drop. Okay, now we're going to show you the answer is no. The optimal bidding involves dropping out generally well before you reach your valuation in a dynamic sense. And if you look at some of those pictures, you will be able to see that that's not like that. That the rational overbidder, he's not following a straightforward bidding strategy. Okay, so there's plenty of evidence that this is not what's going on. So let's now try to dismiss another theory, the perfect Bayesian equilibrium. So we kind of all know what this is. And I already told you this result about an informative perfect Bayesian equilibrium. So that's where everyone snipes. So now let's look at a 2x2 example and show you that there's no perfect Bayesian equilibrium in this 2x2. There's 2 periods, 2 bidders. Here we can do the actual Bayesian calculations. So think about in period 1, it's a symmetrical. Suppose the valuations are uniform on the 0-1 interval, independent for the both bidders. And in period 1, we're looking at a symmetric equilibrium. So they're all both using the same bid function, B1. Okay, now, because they're all symmetry, if you only know who has the high bid, then you know who's got the high valuation, right? So after the first bid, one's told you're the high bidder, the other's you're not the high bidder. Then you do Bayesian updating, and once you learn that, you can calculate the posterior probability, right? For the high bidder, this is their posterior belief. For the low bidder, this is the posterior belief. Now, that's what's called in auctions an endogenous asymmetry. They're no longer symmetric in the second period of that auction. Now, what does that do? Well, you can solve this model now with these bit in the second period. We're going to go by backward induction. You solve this system of functional equations. So we solve this system. I won't make you have to stare at it, but I think we have it right. And here's a picture of the solution. Now, the black line, if it was a static auction, you bid V over 2, well-known closed form solution in a static one-shot auction. Now, in the first period, the red and the blue lines are what they would bid in the first period or in the second period after they learn whether the high or low bidder. So the red line is the person who learns they're the low bidder, they bid more aggressively. The blue line is the one that they learn they're the low valuation, the high valuation, they bid less aggressively. Now, if you look at that figure and you are going to be bidding, which one would you rather bid against, the blue line or the red line? Well, you'd rather bid against the blue line. You want to make the other guy think they're the high valuation bidder, so they bid less aggressively. Well, think about what you do then. You don't bid. You don't submit a bid in the first period, and you fool the other guy into thinking they're the high valuation bidder. But if they both do that, they both don't submit any bid in the first period, and then the auction collapses to the black line, a static sealed bid auction in period 2, QED. Okay, do you follow that? Any questions on that? So this is an example. There can't be any bidding by backward induction in the first period. And so there can only be the standard second price auction. So we don't know if this holds in general. It's more complicated. But you know, I wouldn't want to try. I wouldn't even want to try. I don't even think it's possible. I don't want to try. So we want to go to something that's more doable. So that's a rationally inattentive. I'm going to use the terminology of Chris Sims. I've got 19 minutes, so stay on time. So we're going to use the concept of anonymous. This is a perfect game for anonymous because everything is anonymous. You don't have to assume it is. You don't know who your opponents are, right? You don't know in any particular auction who your opponents. And we borrow from the game theorists this concept of anonymous, and then there's a epsilon anonymous, and I'll show you how that's relevant in a minute. But rather than using all this terminology, I'm going to show you now how we get learning, but it's more learning in a non-Bayesian sense. So we're going to have a 4-parameter model. We're going to have evaluation of the car. There's going to be a cost of bidding, which could be negative, a benefit for bidding. P is the probability that you're inattentive or you're tuned out at any second. So we're going to discretize time into 120 seconds during the auction. You're going to bid at integer seconds, so we're going to use backward induction in discrete time. And then there's going to be extreme value sigma parameter, and I'll show you how this comes in a minute. But the key thing is the beliefs are given by these conditional distributions. So this is the lambda is the probability of the high bid at second T in the auction, given that your bid up to that point is BT, and HT is a 0, 1, which is either 1 if you're the high bidder at that point, or 0 if you're not. So your beliefs are, this is, a sufficient statistic, and we're going to show you that we can estimate this. If it's as if everybody knows this from lots of experience. And so we're going to say in step 1, we're going to estimate these beliefs. And then in step 2, we're going to solve dynamic programs with these beliefs with these bidding frictions and rational inattention to get the bidding strategies and then say, what do they imply? Okay. Any questions at this point? Now, let me try to go to pictures, but to justify this, and you might worry about, well, is there common values for these cars? We're looking at really generic, boring Korean cars called Avanti, Elantra, where, they're just dime a dozen, and so we're not, we're trying to say, really common, if it's offshore oil tracks, that's one thing, but we're not making any assumption about, we're going to be estimating all the values. We're going to be using a fixed effects. We're going to, for every bidder and every auction, we're going to estimate, and then we could look, are those valuations correlated? So we don't have to take a stand at this point, whether there's common values or not. Now, here's the ex-ante beliefs. You could do this. We have enough data. We have 533 of these auctions and thousands of bids. Here, this is with normal distribution. The bid distributions look normal with a point mass. So what you get is a really nice pattern of stochastic dominance. Is the first second of the auction, there's a 90% probability that the high bid is 0. And then you get this little bit of mass for these people, the crazy early bidders, right? And as each second goes on, you get to the final one is at the very final instant, there's this normal distribution of the final bid. Okay. Now, there's also ones where conditional, if you submitted a bid, this is ex ante. If you haven't entered at all, this is your ex ante. So if you're coming in at second 20, you would just go down to the 20th CDF and say, okay, that's my beliefs if I haven't bid. But once you bid, then you have this, you got like a regression. You have to say, oh, my bid is 5,000. Am I the high bidder or not? Then you're going to have a new CDF. So let me show you. This is the mean belief. So there's entire distributions, but I'm showing you the mean path. So here's a bidder that in this bidder 23. These are their actual bids in the auction. This is the actual high bid track. And this is the beliefs implied by our model. So the beliefs are below the high bid and they haven't bid yet. So they just know it every second goes by, bids are ascending. So the mean high bid is going to be higher. And then what happens is that here around second 80, they submit a bid, but they're not the high bid. So their belief still goes higher. They said, wow, I bid already here. I'm still not the high bid. It must be a lot higher than I want. So now their belief goes above the high bid track and they keep trying to bid. And as they bid further, their belief goes higher. But now they become the high bid right there and the belief collapses. What's going on there? Well, it's quite simple. Is when you're the high bid, empirically, you're going to stay at a high bid for a few seconds in the auction, especially in the middle of the auction. At the end, there's more like a bidding frenzy. So, being the high bid at the second 118, you're going to still expect someone to leapfrog you. But at this time in the auction, they don't expect to be leapfrogged for a few seconds. But then someone does leapfrog them, and their bid goes back up, right? So that just gives you a sense that these beliefs are not crazy. They're actually pretty rational and make a lot of sense. And then here's another one. Again, The collapsing here comes when they become the high bidder. See, this one, they have the high bid, but there's time priority. This person is high bid. So when they match that bid, the light doesn't go on because someone beat them in time to be the high bidder. But once they raise their bid, then they think for a little while they're going to continue to be the high bid with high probability. Okay, so here's the estimation strategy. So we did step one. Now we got the system of beliefs for the agents, and now we're going to solve dynamic programming problems with these 4 unknown parameters. Now we're going to use a fixed effects. So there's 533 auctions, but for every bidder in every auction, we're going to estimate these 4 parameters auction by, so bidder auction. So there's 4,029 bidder auction observations in this. And an observation is a 2-minute auction. So we see the sequence of bids and not bids in the auction. So we can write down a likelihood, and we can do 4,000 structural estimations. So we have 16,000 parameters. So you can say this model ought to fit well, right? We got so much flexibility to match every bidder in every auction. Okay, so let me give you a sense of the DP problem. Let's just start with the last period. The last period is second 120 because you could bid right a little bit. In fact, we allow for a little bit of late bids. You see empirically at 120.3 seconds, a bid comes in due to a computer delay, and they take those. So what happens is the high bidder gets revealed at second 121, and then if you're the high bidder, you get, here's your valuation minus your bid. That's your profit, right? Now, then what we can do is take the conditional expectation at the time 120 that you're making that's just the probability of having the high bid given this information. So then the last period is a standard auction. If you're an auction person, it's the profit conditional on winning times the probability of winning, but conditioned on this information. So you maximize that, and that becomes your last period value function, and then you do backward induction. And now we have these extreme value shocks. There's a cost to bidding, so you can improve your bid or stay where you are. If you improve your bid, you incur a mental cost of calculation to improve your bid. So rather than show you too many equations, and then here's where rational inattention, there's a probability in doing this backward induction that if you're tuned out with certain probability, you can improve your bid. You're just not paying attention to the screen, a second goes by. But if you're not tuned out, then you can do this dynamic, you can decide, do I improve my bid or not? And if so, how much do I improve my bid? Now, you might say, how can 10 minutes, how can being inattentive actually lead to early bidding? Well, it's rational inattention, right? So if you know that sometimes you're tuned out, when you are paying attention, you say, hey, I better get a bid in early because I may be tuned out next time. So I want to bid higher and earlier because I'm aware of my inattention. Okay, so that's how it actually makes sense. Now, just an aside, we just proved, I'm happy about this theorem, just proved it the other night. What if you relax the informational restriction? So you just see the high bidder for free. What do you think would happen? So if I don't have the informational restriction, what do you think? Does anyone want to make a guess? What happens in this auction if you don't have, you can just watch the auction and see the high bid without having to bid? What do you think people are going to do? Basically, people are going to informationally free ride. They're going to not bid early because there's no reason to. So we show that if the bid distributions are stochastically monotone, so in terms of first order stochastic, if you have a higher bid, so B now is the highest bid in the auction, which you see for free. You don't have to bid to get it. You just see it on your screen. And if the bid beliefs are stochastically monotone, then we can prove that at least if there's no information, bidding frictions, but you can be rationally inattentive, you'll always wait to the last second. So again, no early bidding. So it's really important. The informational restriction So in the FCC auctions, they have what are called activity rules to make people bid early. But the brilliance of this idea of informational restriction is you have to bid early to learn. And so that's generating the early bidding along with this rational inattention. Okay, now we have a quasi-maximum likelihood to fit this. Let me just show you a picture of how this model fits. So here's this auction 9810. I'm going to explain these dotted lines. These are there's model predictions, and you can say one's kind of off the equilibrium path and on the equilibrium path. So let's explain. These are the actual bids of this bidder 31 in this auction. That's the high bid track. And here's our models. These are the parameters. The valuation is 6511. Now, here's a case where actually their final bid was only one short. They're bidding almost up to their valuation in this case. So it can happen, but doesn't generally happen. But this blue line is if you never bid at all in the auction, you're just waiting. This is the optimal track if your first bid in the auction. So if you waited to the last instant, that one right there is your snipe bid. Now the next one is the green line. The green line we're assuming that the robot bidder is going to bid exactly when the human bidder at the times that they bid. But instead of bidding what the human bidder bid, it's what the model. So the first bid should be at the blue line, but then the next bid is here, then it jumps up to here, here. And so you see by the end, it's caught up and it's almost exactly equal to the last bid of this bidder. So in terms of the final bid, it's really, really good. But here's what we call early overbidding. So actually, at this first bid, he should have been down here, but he bids up there. So the dynamic program it's like off the equilibrium. It's like, whoa, you bid way more than I told you should do. But okay, I can handle it. Okay, now that we're up here, well, you should improve a little bit more and a little bit more. So what you see is the green line catches up with the black line until by the end, they're pretty close. And then you might say, well, that's a pretty good fit. Okay, but the question is this early overbidding pushing up the price and working against these bidders? So I got 6 minutes, I guess, right? So let's get to the punchline. By the way, here's a sniper, and we can nail the snipers. The snipers look very rational in our model. Okay, so and you might say, well, of course it's going to, because I'm adjusting the value. So in this case, when you got a sniper, you just make the value high enough to kind of push that line up, and then their final high bid, now you're bidding well short of your valuation. Okay, now I'm going to show you that these are the district. It's a fixed effect, so we're going to plot all the estimated valuations. There's 4,029 of them. This is the cost of bidding. The inattention. Now, these are high. These are like 99%. 99 at any given second, there's 99% you're tuned out. You might say, wow, that's surprising. How do these guys ever bid? But if you take 0.99 to the 121 power and subtract that from 1, that's to probably make at least one bid. That's like 78%. So even with a 99% inattention probability, there's a good probability that they'll bid. Now, if you put these all together, here's a real auction, here's a simulated auction. Now, so if you just look at them, it's kind of hard to tell which is which, but, and now we look at goodness of fit. And, for the snipers, we can kind of nail them. The snipers, except for a few of them, we nail them. Now, let me show you where the model doesn't fit so well. Well, this is for all 533, the winners. Again, our dots are all on the, close to the 45-degree line, the predicted optimal bid, the final bid. But look at the nature of the bias. Almost all the dots are above the 45-degree. All of, when we make a mistake, our model's bidding less than what they actually bid. Now it gets worse if you take all 40, including the winners. Now we get more dots above the 45-degree line. So the model's under predicting the losers of what they bid. And then if you look at the first bid, it's getting even worse. The first bids, this is the early overbidding. Our model just doesn't predict the high bid, and so if you're George Akerlof, you say, hey, that's animal spirits. They're just aggressively too eager, and they come in too early and too high. So let me stop to allow some questions, but let me give you a bottom line. Basically, we did a bunch of counterfactuals, and I'll just summarize them to say, we're trying to convince you that, well, you would say, John, you have a crummy model. You got to go back and work harder. We're trying to say, no, this model is pretty rational. And if you think these guys are rational, we can show that our robots, our estimated programmers would be doing better than the humans in this auction. So in other words, if you could program one of these bidders, especially a frictionless one, it's going to do better and walk away with more profit than whoever you hired to come and do this for you. And then, so here's the bottom line in terms of mechanism design. Let me conclude with this. We calculate counterfactual revenue per auction in these Avanti auctions. So here's what they actually get, 5824. Now, if our model was correct, our model predicts 5511, which is less. And we say that $300 difference, that's irrational overbidding, is that these animal spirits leads them to bid $300 more than our estimated model. All the flexibility would predict is good. Now, here is what we predict. If these guys could be rational enough to bid in a first price sealed bid auction, we predict 57. Well, that's still more than what it is. Now, if everyone was rational, we would say it's better to have the static auction, but it gets reversed when we account for irrationality. The actual amount is more than a first price sealed bid auction. But now Roger Meyerson comes to save the day. The second price auction is the winner. So and this is assuming they're bidding, truthfully, directly in a second. Now, if they do like in Kegel's experiments, they might even bid even more. So even more reason to use a second price auction in this situation. So what we're doing now is trying to convince this executive to say, hey, can you do an experiment? Can you go away from the auction house, come back and program a simple thing, and let's try to sell some of your cars with a second price auction. And maybe we can even design a reservation price so that can defeat some obvious collusion. Will you do better than the open outcry auction house that you're selling them in now? So end of story. So thanks for your attention. I'll try to stop exactly on 6 o'clock.